In 1977, when Elvis Presley died, half his estate went to Colonel Parker. But the real shock came after Parker's death. The colonel was never actually a colonel. Parker was never his real last name, and he wasn't even American. The person Elvis trusted most in his life was the one who exploited him the most. And the real reason Parker never took Elvis abroad was connected to a crime that no one, especially Elvis, was ever supposed to know about. The lights of Las Vegas shimmered against the night sky as Elvis Presley took the stage at the International Hotel on July 31, 1969. Dressed in a black leather outfit that hugged his still trim figure, the king of rock and roll was making his triumphant return to live performance after years of making increasingly forgettable Hollywood movies. The audience roared as Elvis launched into blue suede shoes, his voice stronger and more passionate than it had been in years. Watching from the shadows at the side of the stage, a portly cigar-chomping man in his late 50s nodded in satisfaction. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's longtime manager, was about to cash in yet again on his most valuable asset. What the cheering audience didn't know, what even Elvis himself didn't know, was that the man calling himself Colonel Tom Parker was living a lie so profound and far-reaching that it had shaped every aspect of Elvis's career. The truth about Parker would only emerge years after both men were dead, revealing one of the most shocking stories of exploitation in entertainment history. The Las Vegas shows were a rousing success, leading to a contract worth $1 million a year, an unprecedented sum in 1969. But once again Elvis would not be taking his rejuvenated act to eager fans in London, Tokyo, Sydney, or Berlin. Despite repeated offers from promoters around the world, despite Elvis's own expressed desire to perform internationally, Colonel Parker always found reasons to keep the king on American soil. Elvis is needed here in the States, Parker would insist whenever the subject came up. His American fans deserve to see him. The foreign offers aren't financially sound. The truth was far more self-serving and sinister. To understand how one of the greatest entertainers in history fell under the control of such a manipulative figure, we need to go back to where it all began. Not to Memphis in 1955 when Parker first took over Elvis's career, but further back, to a small town in the Netherlands in the 1920s, where a young man named Andreas van Kuijk was developing the skills of deception that would eventually trap the king of rock and roll. Andreas van Kuijk was born on June 26, 1909, in Breda, Netherlands, to a working-class Dutch family. Little is known about his early years, except that he ran away from home as a teenager to join the circus, where he learned the art of promotion and hucksterism. But something happened in Breda that would change the course of Van Kuijk's life, and later, Elvis's life. On May 17, 1929, a young woman named Anne van Denden was brutally murdered in Breda. She was the wife of a local grocer where Van Kuijk had worked. The murder was never solved. Shortly after this gruesome crime, Andreas van Kuijk disappeared from the Netherlands, never to return or contact his family again. He would resurface in America with a new identity, Thomas Andrew Parker. The immigrant with no papers, no passport, and possibly a violent crime in his past, reinvented himself completely. He worked in carnivals and pet cemeteries, promoted state fairs and dog shows, and somehow managed to acquire the honorary title of colonel from a Louisiana governor, though some reports suggest he simply started calling himself colonel, and no one questioned it. By the early 1950s, Parker had established himself as a music promoter, working with artists like Hank Snow, Eddie Arnold, and Tommy Sands. But his life changed forever when he first saw a young truck driver from Memphis who moved like no white performer had moved before. From the moment Colonel Parker took control of Elvis Presley's career in 1955, he employed a simple strategy: extract as much money as possible from Elvis's talent, while keeping him dependent and uninformed. Parker negotiated a contract that gave him an unprecedented 50% of Elvis's earnings. Standard rates for managers at the time were 10 to 15%. The arrangement may seem unusual, Parker would tell anyone who questioned it. But Elvis and I are partners. We're building something together. In reality, he was building Elvis into a cash machine that he alone controlled. As Elvis's fame exploded, Parker made decisions that prioritized immediate paydays over artistic growth or long-term career development. He pushed Elvis into a movie career that started promisingly but quickly devolved into formulaic musicals that damaged his credibility as an artist. Between 1956 and 1972, Elvis made 31 movies, many of them rushed productions with weak scripts and forgettable songs. "Every time I go to the studio, it's the same thing," Elvis complained to his friend and Memphis Mafia member Jerry Schilling in the mid-1960s. "Same story, different location. The Colonel says it's what the public wants." What Parker wanted was the guaranteed paycheck that came with each film, especially since he didn't have to do any of the actual work. But the most puzzling aspect of Elvis's career under Parker's management was the complete absence of international touring. At the height of his popularity, when artists like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were building global followings with worldwide tours, Elvis remained confined to the United States with only brief appearances in Canada. The official explanation from Parker was always about security concerns, logistical challenges, or insufficient financial guarantees from foreign promoters. But these excuses made little sense. Elvis was arguably the most famous entertainer in the world. His international tours would have been massively profitable. The truth, as researchers and biographers would later discover, was much more calculated. Colonel Parker couldn't leave the United States because he was an illegal immigrant with no passport. If he had attempted to leave the country, he risked being unable to return, or worse, being discovered as Andreas van Kuijk, possibly wanted for murder in the Netherlands. So rather than allow Elvis to tour with another manager or representative, Parker kept him prisoner in a gilded cage, never revealing the true reason behind his insistence on keeping Elvis in America. Elvis was desperate to tour overseas. Priscilla Presley would later recall in her memoir, he talked about performing in Japan, Australia, and Europe. The Colonel always dismissed the idea, and Elvis never pushed back too hard. He trusted Parker completely. That trust was tragically misplaced. While Elvis was making millions, Parker was taking half of everything, and then finding ways to take even more. He created merchandising companies that would charge Elvis's own production company exorbitant fees, essentially taking money from one of Elvis's pockets and putting it into another pocket that Parker controlled more directly. The exploitation reached absurd levels. When Elvis performed his groundbreaking Aloha from Hawaii television special in 1973, the first global satellite broadcast by a solo entertainer, Parker sold "I couldn't be there in person" buttons to American fans, profiting from a free broadcast. As the years passed and Elvis's health declined due to prescription drug abuse and unhealthy lifestyle, Parker pushed him harder rather than getting him help. Elvis performed an exhausting schedule of concerts throughout the mid-1970s, often in a visibly impaired state. The once virile rock icon had become bloated and unwell, sometimes slurring his words on stage. The Colonel would tell the doctors, "Just make sure he can get on stage," recalled Elvis's stepbrother David Stanley. There was no concern about Elvis as a person, only Elvis as a commodity. On August 16, 1977, that commodity became unavailable forever when Elvis died at Graceland, at the age of 42. But even in death, Parker's exploitation continued. Within hours of Elvis's passing, he was at RCA's offices, negotiating new deals for unreleased material and reissues. In the aftermath of Elvis's death, Parker negotiated a buyout of the Elvis estate's future royalties from RCA, selling what would have been hundreds of millions of dollars of future income for the relatively small sum of $5.4 million, which he then split 50/50ths with the estate. He also maintained his 50% commission on all Elvis merchandise and memorabilia, ensuring that he would profit from the King's legacy for years to come. It wasn't until years after Parker's own death in 1997 that the full truth about his identity and background came to light. Dutch journalist Dirk Vallenga had begun investigating the rumors about Parker's origins in the late 1980s, eventually publishing Elvis and the Colonel, which confirmed that Parker was indeed Andreas van Kuijk from the Netherlands. Further research by biographers like Alana Nash in her book, The Colonel raised serious questions about Van Kuijk's possible connection to the unsolved murder of Anna van den Enden in Breda, a crime that may have spurred his illegal flight to America, and his lifelong fear of returning to Europe. The revelation of Parker's true identity explained one of the great mysteries of Elvis's career: why the world's biggest star never performed for his millions of fans around the globe. It wasn't about logistics or finances, it was about Parker's fear of exposure. Elvis was essentially held hostage by the Colonel's secret, said music historian and Elvis expert Ernst Jorgensen. Parker couldn't risk sending Elvis overseas with another representative, because Elvis might have realized he could do very well without the Colonel. And he certainly couldn't go himself and risk being unable to return to the US or, worse, being identified as Andreas van Kuijk. The tragedy of Elvis and the Colonel's relationship goes beyond simple exploitation. It represents a profound betrayal of trust. Elvis, for all his talent and charisma, was in many ways naive about business matters. He had grown up poor in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee, and was raised to respect authority figures. When Parker entered his life, presenting himself as a savvy industry veteran who could guide his career, Elvis put his faith in him completely. Elvis had a childlike trust in the Colonel, said Priscilla Presley years after Elvis's death. He believed that Parker always had his best interests at heart, even when evidence suggested otherwise. That trust was reinforced by Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, who also deferred to Parker on most business decisions. With both Presley men effectively deferring to Parker's judgment, there was no one to question his increasingly exploitative business arrangements. Parker's control over Elvis extended to nearly every aspect of his professional life. He chose which movies Elvis would make, which songs he would record, which concerts he would perform, and which products he would endorse. While Elvis occasionally pushed back, most notably insisting on the 1968 comeback special against Parker's wishes for a traditional Christmas show, for the most part, he acceded to Parker's decisions. By keeping Elvis focused on work that generated immediate income, rather than artistic growth or long-term legacy, Parker effectively turned one of music's most revolutionary talents into a money-making machine. The movies became increasingly formulaic, the recording sessions often rushed, and the concert schedule grueling. Elvis could have had a very different career, reflected Jerry Schilling, one of Elvis's closest friends and confidants. He was capable of so much more than what we saw, especially in those movie years. But the Colonel was interested in the sure thing, not artistic risks. Perhaps the most painful aspect of the story is that Elvis never learned the truth about the man who controlled his life for over 20 years. He never discovered that Colonel Tom Parker was a complete fabrication, that his trusted manager was an illegal immigrant possibly fleeing a murder charge, or that the real reason he never performed for his millions of fans worldwide was Parker's fear of being exposed. "I think Elvis would have been devastated to learn the truth," said Priscilla Presley. "He valued loyalty above almost everything else. To discover that the person he trusted most had been lying to him from the beginning would have broken his heart." The full extent of Parker's deception only became clear in the decades following Elvis's death, as researchers uncovered his true identity and the likely reasons for his elaborate charade. The man who had presented himself as a patriotic American businessman, often wearing red, white, and blue and handing out small American flags at events, was in fact an undocumented immigrant who had abandoned his Dutch family and possibly fled a murder scene. Even after his death, Parker's influence continued to shape Elvis's legacy. The hasty deal he'd made with RCA for Elvis's back catalog meant that the Presley estate received no royalties from the sales of Elvis's pre-1973 recordings for decades, depriving Elvis's heirs of millions in income and limiting their ability to control how his music was used. It wasn't until 2004 that Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, sold 85% of Elvis Presley Enterprises to entertainment company CKX, which began to manage the Presley image and legacy in a more strategic, respectful manner. Only then did Elvis's career begin to receive the kind of careful curation and thoughtful presentation that it had always deserved. The story of Elvis and the Colonel remains one of music history's most troubling relationships, a cautionary tale about trust, exploitation, and the dark side of the entertainment industry. Elvis, the poor boy from Tupelo who changed the face of popular music, fell under the control of a carnival barker with a shadowy past who valued profit over art, commerce over legacy, and self-preservation over his clients' best interests. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of their relationship is the question of what might have been. What kinds of artistic choices might Elvis have made with a manager who valued his creativity? What kind of performances might fans around the world have witnessed if Elvis had been free to tour globally? What kind of legacy might Elvis have built if his career had been guided by someone interested in more than just the next paycheck? We'll never know. But what we do know is that behind the glitz and glamour of Elvis's legendary career lies a dark secret, the story of an illegal immigrant who reinvented himself as Colonel Tom Parker and captured the king in a golden cage, never to be freed. As for Andreas van Kuijk, the Dutch teenager who would become Colonel Parker, his secret remained safe until after his death. He died in Las Vegas in 1997, taking with him whatever really happened in Breda in 1929 and maintaining to the end the elaborate fiction he had constructed for himself as Colonel Tom Parker. The ultimate irony is that Parker, who went to such lengths to hide his true identity and avoid returning to Europe, needn't have worried so much. By the time Elvis was at the height of his fame in the 1950s and 60s, the statute of limitations on any crime committed in the Netherlands in 1929 would have expired. Parker could likely have obtained legal status in the U.S. through his marriage to an American citizen or through other means. But perhaps the deception had gone on too long by then. Perhaps Parker had lived as Colonel Tom Parker for so many years that returning to his true identity seemed impossible. Or perhaps he feared that if Elvis discovered his manager's entire life was a fabrication, their relationship would be irreparably damaged. Whatever his reasons, Parker's secret cost Elvis the opportunity to share his extraordinary talent with audiences around the world. It kept him trapped in a cycle of formulaic movies and grueling concert schedules when he might have explored more fulfilling artistic paths. And it ensured that one of music's greatest innovators spent his final years as little more than a cash cow for a manipulative handler. The twisted tale of Elvis and the Colonel reminds us that sometimes the greatest dangers don't come from obvious enemies but from those we trust the most. Behind the scenes of Elvis's legendary career was a man living a lie that ultimately cost both men dearly, albeit in very different ways. Colonel Parker's secret remained hidden during his lifetime, allowing him to maintain his grip on Elvis's career and legacy. But in the end, the truth could not stay buried forever. The revelation of Parker's true identity, and the likely reason he kept Elvis from performing internationally, has forever changed how we view the career of the King of Rock and Roll, a career shaped as much by what Parker prevented as by what he promoted.